Welcome to Fish University, your one-stop shop for the science behind fish management. It is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. I'm Wes Neal, your host. I'm an extension professor of fisheries and a researcher for Mississippi State University. Join me as I talk to researchers, managers, and landowners about the tools and science and the tricks of the trade for managing fish, water, and habitat. The goal is for you to have better fishing and a healthier aquatic ecosystem. So grab a notebook and the beverage of your choice and relax and enjoy Fish University. Welcome everybody to Fish University. I'm excited about today's podcast because we're doing something a little bit different. Up to this point, we've mostly talked with folks that manage private waters or do research on fish and wild populations, but today we're going to take a little different approach. We're going to be talking about aquarium fish and how to maintain aquaria to keep fish happy and healthy. My guest today is Dr. Jessie Sanders. A lot of times I have people on here who have PhDs and we call them doctor, but she's an actual fish doctor. She has a doctorate of veterinary medicine and she's a certified aquatic vet, and she is the owner of Aquatic Veterinary Services. So Jessie, tell me about yourself and how you ended up with such a specialized field.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to people, a little bit outside of their niche. So I have a bachelor's in marine biology from the University of Rhode Island. And during that time, I had the great opportunity to volunteer at the local aquarium. So that's Mystic Aquarium back in Connecticut. And I loved every moment I was in there working with the fish and inverts, and kind of started getting back on the veterinary bandwagon. I'd fallen off it in favor of, a master's degree in doing something with fish or biology. So after harassing the aquarium staff to no end, they kind of pushed me towards the veterinary side of things. And they really pushed me back on the path to being a veterinarian. But I thought I would be a veterinarian for an aquarium, which unfortunately the jobs are very few and far between. So they are very, very competitive. But thankfully I had a mentor my last year of veterinary school that had a small animal exotics and fish clinic out of Buffalo, New York. And she really opened my eyes to how awesome, private practice side of things could be. And it really gave me a little bit more freedom to work directly with clients. So I ended up opening my practice. We're coming up on 10 years in just about 1 month. So very excited. We've grown this practice from pretty much nothing. And we're a very unique practice. There's really not many like us in the country right now.
Yeah, and you say, you work mostly with fish. Well, fish are not something you can put in the cage and carry down to your local vet clinic because, obviously fish need water. And most people probably want you to come to their location, correct? I'm assuming you're doing home visits, a mobile practice. You're going to specific locations and checking out issues in tanks, correct?
Yes. So being a mobile practitioner is perfect for fish because, as you said, you can transport fish. In a bucket with water after you've chased them around for a while and they're super stressed out. So by having me go to the tank or the pond where the fish are, it's a lot easier for the owners, and the fish are usually a lot less stressed because I can just scoop them out, do the exam right then and there next to them, and then they return to their home environment. And when it comes to fish, these are essentially prey animals. So anytime that you put hands on them, they think that you're going to eat them. So again, being a mobile practitioner, allows me to have that decreased stress of an exam. And it also allows me to evaluate the tank or the pond in its entirety. Because there's a lot of things that, since I just stare at fish all day, I'm going to notice compared to, an owner who might be a little bit newer with this.
There's a really cool TV show out there called Tanked where it's all about people that build fancy aquaria for the wealthy. Whether you're a famous musician or a sports star, you may want a shark tank in your house. Are those the kind of tanks that you go visit?
So actually not really at all. What we have as far as clients are mostly outdoor koi ponds here in California. That's about 80% of our business. And then we have about 15%, which is goldfish. So goldfish, 1 or 2 in a little tank. That's pretty much all I've had this week has been single goldfish in their tanks. And then we maybe have 4% betta fish, so those little ornamental labyrinth fishes. And then the last little percentage is everything else. So it's a lot of cichlids, a little bit of saltwater, but really with those saltwater setups, I mean, if you're getting into saltwater, you really want to, not screw it up. So there's a lot more kind of thought that goes into putting those systems together. And usually it's the, increasing the thought behind it that'll decrease the issues that you have with the animals down the line. I mean, with our goldfish patients we're seeing right now, I mean, everyone's going to try to stuff a comet goldfish into a 5 to 10 gallon tank where they really need at least 20 gallons per fish. So really it just comes down to not really paying attention or taking care of them. And that's where a lot of the health issues that I get called in for come from.
For somebody who has a single goldfish or a single betta fish, those aren't pricey fish to buy typically. But to bring a veterinarian in to deal with health issues, it shows that people really truly love their pet fish. They don't just say, okay, well, I'll just get a new one. It's interesting that they won't take care of something that they love so much, but it is easy to get a fish sick. I mean, you can look at them the wrong way sometimes and they can get sick. So I think I understand why, your services would definitely be needed. But with the koi, that makes total sense because koi are very expensive fish. I mean, some koi, if you get koi with specific markings that have been grown up to a larger size, they could be worth, thousands of dollars. So I can certainly understand how someone with a koi pond with very pricey fish that they've raised for years, there's a lot of value in those ponds, and keeping those fish healthy makes sense. So what are some of the issues that you would encounter in like a koi pond?
So with the koi ponds, I mean, yes, there are some that are worth a lot of money, but we get a lot of backyard ponds that, people have essentially just loved their fish. So they might not be worth tons of money, but still the investment of digging a hole and filling it with lots of water, especially in California, you really want to make sure that it's worth your while. What we see most commonly with koi ponds comes from adding fish without quarantining them. Anyone who has a tank or a pond, you understand the urge to always add more to it, flush it out, make it whatever you have in your head. And a lot of the times you might be throwing in a fish that, although it looks clinically normal, with the stress of, again, putting it in the bag, putting it in the car, dumping them in a foreign environment, maybe with not great water chemistry, it's going to decrease their immune function, and anything that's lurking on that fish, from a parasite to a virus to a bacteria, can then essentially thrive and spread throughout the pond. So this happens a lot coming up in the spring that we have, and we're going to be out there treating parasites a couple times a week.
You mentioned water chemistry. Is this like alkalinity related, where they have poor alkalinity? Because we see that a lot in farm ponds, where if you have low total dissolved solids, low hardness, low alkalinity, particularly the alkalinity, we see when the temperatures are changing drastically, they're cold to warm, cold rains come in, the fish get really stressed out because of the osmoregulation that's going on. They're trying to keep their internal balance healthy, and they're becoming more and more stressed out, and they become susceptible to everything from fungal infections to bacterial infections. Is that the same thing that's going on in these koi ponds?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is essentially just on a smaller scale. So a lot of these systems are going to be recirculating systems, so they're not, getting the benefit of having fresh water from any natural springs or lakes or rivers coming in. And with all the rain that we've had, rain tends to be very acidic. So the pH that I actually went out and collected a sample outside and tested, it was at a 6.0 for pH, where our normal water around here is 8 to 8.5. And also that rain coming down has a very, very low KH, or carbonate alkalinity, as you were saying. And the carbonate alkalinity is what keeps your pH stable, because it's able to kind of tame up all those rogue hydrogen ions that are going around. And especially with a temperature fluctuation, I mean, fish are ectotherms, and their metabolism and all their body function is based on the water temperature. So when it gets warmer and they start being more active, they're going to need a lot of those buffers. And if your KH is too low, that's going to cause your pH to go down, make your fish super stressed out. So it's essentially the same in a giant pond or a tiny backyard pond. Any change in pH, your KH, We don't really have GH problems out here, so your total hardness. All of our California water is hard unless you're starting with, say, RO water. But we also test your nitrogen cycle, your ammonia, your nitrite, your nitrate, and then sometimes we might test, oxygen or salinity.
So if it's similar to a natural lake, is the solution the same? If we have a small lake and we have very poor water chemistry and fish are dying, the solution is just like your garden. If you have a low pH garden, you put agricultural crushed limestone on the garden. We do the same thing in lakes where we'll dump 2 tons, 3 tons per acre to try to neutralize the water and keep the fish from dying. Is it the same thing in these small koi ponds?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We don't need, the 40-pound bags of the ag lime. Usually a lot of, homeowners will just grab the local box of baking soda off their kitchen shelves, and that's at least, a good temporary fix for some of these. Again, they're recirculating systems, so a lot of the times just adding some fresh water from the city system, making sure you dechlorinate it, obviously. But yes, there's definitely a lot of things that owners can do to buffer their water to make sure that they don't have those pH shifts. But yes, it is pretty much exactly the same.
Let's talk a little bit about the betta fish, because I used to keep bettas as a kid, and I usually had a small, maybe a gallon bowl, maybe it was less than that, and I'd go to the store and I'd buy a blue betta off the shelf. It'd be in a little cup about the size of a coffee cup, and it's probably been there for weeks, and they can breathe the air, but the water quality certainly is probably not very good. I bring them home, I put them into this bowl, and suddenly they go from a few ounces up to a whole gallon, so it's like a whole new world to them. And I keep them for, sometimes years, but typically months maybe. Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about people that are like fancy breeders? What kind of clients do you mostly work with?
So most of the times our betta clients are families that have, gotten their child a new pet fish. And the biggest issue that we see with those guys is essentially just poor husbandry. So as you described, dropping your betta in a bowl, yes, they have that lovely labyrinth organ, so they'll be able to breathe the air. But it's a survival mechanism for, out in the wild when they're stuck in a tiny puddle when the rains give out. So bettas do so much better with just 2 simple fixes of a low flow filter and a heater. Again, these guys are tropical fish. They like it to be a little bit warmer, which, again, depending on where your bowl is located, is going to be really hard to achieve. So, moving them up to even a little tiny 5-gallon aquarium with a low flow filter, because again, those fins get pushed around by big filters, makes it very hard for them to swim. They burn a ton of calories and then get really lethargic. And a heater, that usually solves most of the issues for betta owners that actually call into our office. We've actually set up a page specifically on our website just saying, if you have a betta, just do these 2 things. And unless there's something seriously wrong, that will usually fix the issue.
Yeah, I understand the heater, because one of the biggest problems I always had with my bettas was ick. And the ick tends to be more prevalent at lower temperatures. Most people keep their house somewhere around 72 degrees. Well, these betta fish, they're coming from Southeast Asia, where 72-degree water temperature is something they experience maybe in the dead of winter. They're used to much warmer water most of the time, and they struggle when it gets cold. So I'd never thought about a heater because I never put them into larger aquaria. Obviously, if you put them into a large aquaria with other fish, then you got to worry about fish picking at their fins. So they'd have to be pretty much in their own aquaria or with fish that are friendly, peaceful fish.
I'm always surprised by, they'll say this fish is peaceful, but we get fish that just don't read those books. They're just like, why are you being mean? This isn't in your nature. You just feel like being a jerk. Like, it happens.
Yes, it happens. But then there's the people that they buy the Oscar and they just don't understand why that Oscar ate everything else. But they think something else must have happened. So they go and buy more fish, and their Oscar just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Oh, yeah, we've had those.
And you work with goldfish a lot, too. Same thing, where the goldfish are just a family pet. Someone buys a goldfish, and they want to keep it alive so that the kids don't cry, or what is it?
Yes, so we get a lot of goldfish that are won as prizes from fairs and carnivals. And thankfully, some owners, actually take the considerations to set those fish up in a nice tank. A lot of the times the owners are just surprised that, even with minimal care, these fish have grown, significantly and lasted a lot longer. So again, goldfish can put up with a lot of beginner mistakes as far as diet, water quality. So again, they're hardy. So a lot of people think they can put up with a lot, but they really thrive if you take the extra time to give them a lot of space. Goldfish are just messy, messy little critters. They're constantly eating, and it's going to not really be converted well and shoot out the other end. So just making sure that your maintenance with those guys is up to par. I mean, I have a client today. This little fish is, all alone in a 10-gallon tank, and he's been sick for a couple months with his tail up, nose down in a corner. So we're just going to go probably check the water quality and be like, yep, I know what's wrong.
So when you get a fish like that, it's bloated and it's having buoyancy issues to where it, as you said, its tail's up, its nose is down, or vice versa, can you save them, or are they usually too far gone at that point?
So with buoyancy disorders, it really depends on what is causing it. I am much more successful in correcting buoyancy disorders in comet and long body goldfish. But if you take that little body and you crush it down to some of the fancy standards that we have, so our pearl scales, our orandas, our ryukins that have giant heads, very short little bodies, those guys are just not structurally sound. Standard comets will have 2 chambers of their swim bladder. Goldfish are physostomous fish, so that means that they have a duct between their esophagus and their swim bladder, so they suck in a little bit of air and they're able to kind of push that air into their swim bladder. But a lot of fancies only have 1 chamber, and sometimes they have very ornate fins, which makes them heavier, a giant wen on their head. So with the fancy goldfish, those buoyancy disorders are a lot harder to correct than a standard comet, which again is just set up for a little bit more structural integrity, and again will usually be a water quality issue, and the fancies is just something that they were born with.
And people don't realize how we get these weird traits on goldfish is through selective breeding, and a lot of times, selective breeding is a nice term for inbreeding.
Yeah, essentially it's the same.
So I mean, you're picking these fish and crossbreeding them for these traits, which personally I don't even find very attractive in a fish. I mean, when you've got these fish with the pop eyes and the huge frilly fins, and they basically can't swim any longer, it's kind of like those cats with no ears and no hair. It's just, I don't find that very attractive. I don't think I'd want that in my aquarium. But
they have quite a following. If you go online and look at all those fancy goldfish, they have quite a following. I mean, they have shows for goldfish that, break them into those different categories, just like they have koi shows that, judge a koi based on its body condition and its color, which again, with those inbreeding, I suspect they might have been breeding for other things that give fish nice body conditions, like giant tumors.
But goldfish as a species is a pretty tolerant fish. You were talking about how you can pretty much just throw them into a pool and they'll do fine and they'll just eat like crazy. We were recently doing research with Atlantic tarpon, and we collected wild tarpon, small juvenile tarpon from the wild, brought them into the recirculating system, and we did stress studies on them. Basically, we simulated angling, which meant we chased them around with a net a whole lot. And then we dip them up as if they were being pulled out of the water. Then we'd knock them out, and we would try to pull blood from them to do blood chemistry, everything from cortisol to hematocrit, all the different blood parameter measurements. But these tarpon, as long as they were warm, they could jump out on the floor, they could hit their heads, we could pull them out, leave them out of the water for almost 8 minutes, jab them with a needle in a variety of locations trying to pull blood. They'd look completely gone. We'd throw them back in the water and they were fine. We went for about 8 months doing these experiments without losing a single fish. And then we decided to do some thermal tolerance experiments. And we started lowering the temperature down. You start lowering the temperature down, then suddenly if you looked at them wrong, they died. Mm-hmm. So temperature is critical for most of these aquarium fish because they're not coming from Minnesota. There are people out there that keep native fish, and that's great. Mm-hmm. But if you're taking fish, you're buying them from an aquarium store, and those fish came from the Amazon River or the Mekong River or somewhere else in Southeast Asia, you can't lower your thermostat when you go away for Christmas break and expect your fish to do fine. No. So people need to understand those heaters are important, and maintaining a stable temperature, warm, stable temperature is so critical.
Yeah, goldfish are temperate fish. They have a tolerance anywhere from just above freezing up into the 80s. So they're a invasive species issue. because, when your goldfish gets too big for their home aquarium, a lot of people we'll just release it to the wild into this pond or river. And these things can get massive. They're essentially just pretty carp, which have the genetic propensity to grow insanely large. So yeah, I mean, there's articles coming out every couple months of somebody found this giant koi or goldfish that had escaped. I'm using air quotes. I don't know if you can see that in podcast land. That probably did not actually escape, but was purposely released and, is just wreaking havoc with natural populations.
Yeah, in the last episode I recorded, we were talking about alligator gar and the exact same issue where people are breeding alligator gar. They think they're great aquarium pets. They put them in their aquarium, but they quickly outgrow the aquarium. If you're within the area that alligator gar live, maybe it's not going to have a major impact on genetics or other things, but if you introduce them outside of their range where they can hybridize with other species of gar or establish new populations, I mean, you're playing with fire. So it's really important that we know you love your pets, but they should never be released into the wild.
Never. Under any circumstances, never.
I collected goldfish in Arkansas not long ago, where we were electrofishing a large lake, and we were catching 15 to 16, 17-pound butterfly koi. So they're not goldfish, but they're butterfly koi.
Still carp.
But I've seen goldfish in every body of water from the tropics to fairly far north. I went to Virginia Tech for my undergraduate degree, and we had a duck pond that was just full of goldfish. So if they can survive the winters in Blacksburg, Virginia, they can survive the winters a lot of different places.
Oh, yeah.
I always like to ask people, do you know where the world record piranha came from? And they're like, no. They're assuming, the South somewhere. It actually came from
Wisconsin.
Now,
What?
piranhas are a tropical species, but we have these things called power cooling reservoirs that release warm water. And this thing can find refuge where the warm water comes out. So even if you live in Minnesota and you let a tropical fish go, if you let it go in your local lake and that lake has a power plant on it, it might be able to overwinter. So you just got to be careful. It's never a good idea to let a pet animal go to the wild.
No.
So what are some of the really weird diseases you've worked with in your career?
So, I mean, a lot of my patients that I see are not anything too fancy or exotic. So a lot of it is, basic freshwater parasites, your ick, your trichodina, your gyrodactylus, and your dactylogyrus. A lot of it, again, comes down to husbandry. So we have a lot of just environmental bacterial outbreaks that, might need some drugs. What I tend to deal with that's kind of outside the aquaculture side of things are cases with cancer. So these are tumors that have grown either inside the fish or on the outside of the fish. In goldfish in particular, it is common to have neurofibromas, also known as spindle cell tumors. Basically, they cause these giant lumpy blobs on the outside of your goldfish, and they can be very concerning for the owners, especially if you have a fish that has more than one blob on them. What's really good about these, though, is they don't cause any serious health concerns for the fish. And we've tried to treat them with surgery, silver nitrate, cryotherapy. And unfortunately, since they are, again, knurled in origin, there's really no getting rid of them entirely. So a lot of the times, the fish is fine with that lump or bump, unless it's, say, hindering their ability to eat or swim. So in those cases, we might attempt a debulking surgery, knowing that that tumor very likely will come back at some point. But again, with the cancers, that can be something very concerning. Now, in the koi, however, we get a lot of internal tumors. So these are usually very hard to detect until they are very, very large, because, say, if you have a mass within the coelomic cavity, it's going to just basically take up more and more of that cavity until it's pretty much, almost completely full. And then the fish starts to look a little lopsided. And even with that, during spawning season, if your ladies are getting large, you might just mistake it for a large ovary. And we have asymmetrical ovaries. That happens all the time. So with these guys, I suspect we get a lot of ovarian tumors. I see it pretty much in the larger ladies. I had one a couple weeks ago. Originally, a Japanese bred koi. She's been in a bunch of shows. only sign that we really had from her that she was sick was she wasn't eating for a couple weeks and went from a robust 34 pounds. So she's a big girl, all the way down to 24 pounds. We were attempting different antibiotics. I was trying to look at her with my ultrasound, but given that she is very girthy, she's about 14 inches across, I wasn't able to penetrate. So we were looking to do another CT with her. So we do have a CT group that we can work with, that we can image these very large fish. But the owner was just kind of at his wit's end at that point, and we euthanized her. And when I did the necropsy, there was a large grapefruit-size tumor in there that was pressing on her intestines, making it impossible for any food to get through. So again, I mean, in aquaculture, if you have a fish with a little lump or a bump, they're removed from the population, no harm, no foul. But if you have a pet fish that, say, has a cancerous growth, unfortunately, we don't really have all those options that you have in, say, cats and dogs, where they're actually able to undergo some chemotherapy. So really, it's, discussing quality of life with the owner. We're trying to learn more about these tumors every chance that we get. So some fish, will do just fine. Those little neurofibromas on the goldfish, they'll be fine. Unfortunately, they'll go gonadosarcomas in the koi. If we don't catch them early enough, it will unfortunately be terminal. If we can catch them early, we are able to do surgery for them, but I am unfortunately not very good at catching them early. I don't think anyone is.
Are the causes of these cancers in fish similar to the causes of cancer in humans? Are we talking about environmental factors, chemicals, radiation, all the different things that cause cancers in humans, genetics? What's the leading cause of a lot of these things? Do we know?
So unfortunately, we really don't know, but I mean, a cell is a cell, and no matter what animal it's in. So again, like you said, all the environmental, genetics, we had a pond that had ridiculously high heavy metals that had a lot of cancer outbreaks. So I suspect the causes, are the same no matter what the species are.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Fish University. Do you have a question or a topic for the podcast? If so, you can email me at wes, that's W-E-S, .neal, that's N-E-A-L, at Mississippi State, that's M-S-S-T-A-T-E, .edu. Or instead, please visit the Fish University Facebook page. On the Facebook page, you will find useful articles, videos, stories, and other information, as well as updates on upcoming podcasts. Not to mention, you can send me a private message with questions or suggestions. Just search Fish University and look for our colorful logo. And please follow the Fish University page. We need your support. Now back to the show.
Well, Jessie, I wanted to change gears a little bit and tell you it was somebody just like you that actually got me into the field that I'm in now when I was a kid. And I'm not going to say how long ago that was. And this is, keep in mind, pre-Discovery Channel and all those things we can watch nowadays. I saw a show on TV of a fish doctor, a vet that was doing work with koi. And the one thing I can remember from the show, now this was 40 years ago probably, I remember they had a koi that with a bad eye. It was blind in one eye, and the doctor put in a glass eye in the koi. And from that point, I remember saying, I want to be a fish doctor when I grow up. And technically I'm a doctor, and I work with fish, but I'm not a fish veterinarian like I originally said I was going to be. But someone doing exactly what you're talking about got me into this field. So thank you.
Wow. Yeah, sure. I mean, when I do eye surgeries, I usually don't put anything in. It's really hard sometimes to get anything to stay in the empty cavity. So I do enucleations or eye removal surgeries a lot. And they are my favorite surgery to do because the fish always heal up beautifully. It's like the eye was never even there.
So is that because, are the eyes usually lost because of parasites or ammonia content of the water or a variety of different things?
So usually it's either going to be a traumatic injury or, again, with the cancerous tumors. Koi in particular tend to get chromatophloromas or pigment cell tumors on their eye. Most of the time it's not a big deal. Usually their vision isn't too badly affected, but if they, say, try to knock whatever they suspect is on their eye off, obviously it's attached to their head, they could damage the tissue and just make it gross and sloughing. And in that case, it's, a perfect little import for any bacteria to get in. So in that cases, that would be when we usually go ahead and remove the eye.
And you do a lot of removals of tumors that are not life-threatening, just more aesthetically unpleasing to the owner?
Yes.
So I compared you earlier to the TV show Tanked, but I think Dr. Pimple Popper might be a better comparison.
Sure, but don't start me on people. People are so gross compared to fish. My sister's a human surgeon, so we gross each other out at holidays.
So in addition to playing with fish diseases and working with owners who love their fish, you're also an author, correct?
Yes. Yes, I have a couple books out.
Well, you have a new book out. I just absolutely love the title. It's How to Kill Your Koi.
Yes.
Obviously, that is probably the opposite of what the book's trying to do. But let's talk about the book.
Yes. So the title comes from each of the chapters is based on some silly myth that I have heard in my 10 years in practice. So, for instance, the water quality chapter starts with the myth, I don't need to test my water, it looks fine. Which, as you know, the way water looks can tell you absolutely nothing about any of the nitrogen parameters, pH, KH, nothing. So again, that's just one of our owners like, oh, it looks fine. Like maybe if it gets cloudy, which again is probably going to be a serious ammonia issue, that's going to be something that is going to be a big problem for owners. So in the water quality chapter, we essentially break that down of why that is not true and how you need to test your water, what parameters you should be testing for, how those affect your fish, and how to, keep on top of your water quality on your own. So we have our nutrition chapter, which is one of my favorite topics, is the most expensive koi food is the best. Which, I mean, as I'm sure you know with all those aquaculture diets, that is any diet, it comes down to marketing. So, yes, that's why we named the book How to Kill Your Koi, based on all those silly things that I have heard from other people over the years.
With the diet issue, have you encountered people that try to stockpile food? One of the things we've seen with aquaculture foods is if you don't use a extruded pelleted food within 2 or 3 months of its production, that the vitamin C in it begins to degrade and have all kinds of issues. Do you see people that don't realize that they can't store food for 3 years and feed their fish?
Oh, yeah. Yep, people will buy it in bulk. It's like, yeah, I've had this food for 18 months. I'm just sitting there going, oh, dear goodness. I mean, what helps with the smaller fish, it's usually in a smaller bag. So that really helps, prohibit a lot of vitamin C loss. But obviously, if you, say, have a flaked diet that has a large surface to mass ratio, with the water soluble vitamin like vitamin C, it's going to be gone pretty much within those first couple of months. So yes, we strongly recommend people store it inside sealed container, dark room, consistent temperature. You maybe get 6 months out of it for those little bags, but with flakes, you're looking 2-3 months tops.
So if I get an aquarium and some fish soon, that I probably shouldn't use the old can of flaked food I have that's probably been in the bottom of my sink for about 3 decades?
Yeah, no, don't use that. That's all right. Well, again, one of my cases this week was flake food that was over a year old, and the little things just unfortunately, he's lost a lot of his fins just from, again, environmental bacteria. So he's perfectly fine. He doesn't seem to notice that he has no fins. He's zipping around the tank like nothing's wrong. So, again, getting him on a better diet. The water quality is great, but that diet really makes a big component for making sure that your fish stay healthy.
You say this is based on fish myths. I have a myth to share with you from a trip I had to Cambodia a while back. We were working with some local farmers. They have small ponds, and we were trying to teach them how to raise fish within the ponds. And they were telling us, and this came from several different people, that they tried to raise tilapia in the ponds, and that the tilapia were doing fantastic. They were feeding them. They were growing very well. They were almost ready to harvest. They were almost big enough to harvest. And a big thunderstorm came up. The fish all swam to the bottom, buried their heads in the mud, and died. That's what they believe happened. They believed the fish were scared of thunder, and they went and buried their heads and died. And we tried to explain to them that more likely what had happened was they had a pond turnover, and all the low oxygen water that was down deep was mixed by the storm, and the fish suffocated and then died and then sunk to the bottom. But no, they were scared of thunder because that's what they believed.
All right.
So that project actually worked out really well. We got them to raise a fish that could breathe the air, and they never had another problem. So.
Oh, okay. What species did they switch to?
They were working with pangasiid catfish, which
okay.
Yeah. So, you probably know them in the aquarium industry. Was it iridescent shark or something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
So
don't see a lot of them, but they are really cool when I get to play with them.
They raised those and were able to grow them up to harvestable size in like 6 months. So as long as there was no thunderstorm, they were fine.
Feel bad for all those tilapia and all the lakes and golf courses in Florida. You must get thunderstorms all the time.
Exactly. What other myths have you had to dispel?
So one of the other fun myths that I get to bust in my book is about UV lights. So I don't know if you got a lot of those with aquaculture, but essentially it's a sterilizing bulb that, the water will pass through as it's going through the recirculating system. And owners always assume that if they have a UV bulb on their system, that there's no bacteria or parasites in their pond, because obviously the water is sterilizing them. Well, sorry to say that, 99.999% of the bacteria and parasites that are in the pond are actually on the fish themselves. So unless you're actually, getting that fish next to that UV light, when in that case would cause horrific sunburn among, other things, UV lights will help your pond clarity a little bit, but it's really not going to be anything that is curative for your fish. Again, a little bit different with our indoor tanks versus our outdoor ponds. But yeah, those UV lights, they are not magic sterilizer things that will take care of every little issue on your fish.
And that's why you mentioned earlier quarantining a fish before you add it to your pond or tank. And that's for that very reason. If you have a healthy pond or tank, let's say you have a 10-gallon tank and all the fish in it are parasite-free and it's running out into a UV sterilizer. In that situation, the UV sterilizer is maintaining the water quality and keeping the parasites and the bacteria from growing within the water before they get on the fish. But when you bring a fish in that has parasites all over it or bacteria all over it, and you put it in the tank, you're introducing it to it. Not to mention the parasites, a lot of them live in snails before they go to the fish, or they live in the soil, or they live on the rocks in the tank. The water's the only thing moving through that sterilizer.
Yeah,
so
correct.
If they're attached to any surface, if they're not floating around the water, certainly they're not going to go through that. We do use the UV sterilizers in quarantine facilities and aquaculture, recirculating aquaculture. But usually what we have is we have an empty tank. We have water running through that all the time, sterilizing it. The fish go in, we treat them. Mm-hmm. They're being treated with some sort of antibacterial, antifungal, antiparasitic agent. And then once they're clean, then you can put them into the tank. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not going to take the parasites off the fish. And if you thought you had problems with tumors before, try putting one in front of a UV sterilizer.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, let's not go there. let's not go like that. Yeah, anytime you're bringing in something new, you run the risk of it bringing in something funky. And I know it's a pain in the butt to have to, set up a separate tank. Usually it's not going to be cycled, so you're dealing with all of your nitrogen products coming up and being issues with that as well. And it's a lot, it's just too much for a lot of owners, especially if you're doing larger fish like koi. So, I mean, you're essentially just rolling the dice if you're going to toss that fish into that tank or that pond that hasn't been quarantined, even though, I mean, every single pet store dealer will tell you that their fish is, perfectly healthy. But again, the stress of transport, or if the fish hasn't been at that facility very long, again, it all comes down to temperature and how much they're exposed to. So they can break with disease later rather than at that store for 2-3 days at most.
So when you set up that separate tank, do you recommend adding any kind of, whether it's salt or antibiotics to the tank? How do you treat the fish in some way in that quarantine tank?
So the best thing for a lot of our freshwater pet species is going to be a little bit of salt. Now, therapeutic levels for most issues are going to be about 3 to 6 parts per thousand, depending on, how much salt those little fish have seen before. Sometimes if, they've been kept on a 1 to 2 parts per thousand, you might need a little bit more salt to shrivel up any of those parasites that are riding around. But again, being freshwater fish, having a little bump in salinity helps the kidneys and gills, again, with that osmoregulation and making things a little bit easier to function. So especially when you're dealing with the stress of a new environment, having a little bit of salt in there can really help with just their overall ability to tolerate life at that point.
And the reason for that being that there is salt in the fish. The fish has salt in its blood, and it's somewhere in that low percentage range that she mentioned. So the closer the outside water is to the inside of the fish, the less work they have to do to try to keep their salt balance inside their body the same. So it's less stress on the fish. One thing I always get a kick out of is people that say, oh, I caught a big fish in the lake and I put it on a cooler with ice and water and I know it's lost weight. Well, if you went to a freshwater lake and you caught a largemouth bass and you threw it in a cooler full of ice water that's pure water and that fish died, that fish actually got heavier, not lighter, because it's no longer osmoregulating. So all that fresh water wants to come into the salty body and equilibrate that salt concentration between the outside and the inside. Now, if you catch a saltwater fish and you put it in salt water, then the opposite happens, and that fish will lose weight. But a lot of times that argument of, oh, this fish would have been the new record had it not died, is usually wrong in fresh water.
Oh, yeah.
because the fish can no longer do what's so important to it, which is maintain that internal balance. It's just like you. Your body's stressed, your body becomes more susceptible to outside influences, and the same thing for fish. If they're stressing out over the water around them, having the salt concentration outside that fish a little higher helps them stress less.
Correct. Yep, absolutely.
Jessie, when your publicist contacted me about the possibility of doing this show with you, she said you'd be willing to talk about anything fish, any diseases fish, but she specifically mentioned something it's caught my attention and I've been struggling with. And she said, fish constipation. Do fish get constipated?
No, they do not. No, and it goes exactly back to that point that you just made about osmoregulation. So in freshwater fish, through the simple process of osmosis and diffusion, water is constantly being poured into their bodies. And again, it's the kidneys and gills that are responsible for getting rid of that excess water, but that's going to be active transport compared to passive transport, which is obviously going to be a little bit faster. So technically, any freshwater fish is going to be overhydrated at pretty much any point. And again, this is one of those myths that thankfully is not very common in koi. But in goldfish, my goldfish is constipated all the time, and it drives me insane. Because again, if you are overhydrated all the time, there's no way that you can have hard, concentrated stools. It just does not work that way in fish. I'll grant you that goldfish do not have the most robust GI tract. It is a very simplified system. They don't really have an acidic stomach. They don't have a true stomach to begin with. So their little GI tract is essentially just taking all those lovely crushed up pellets and sucking the delicious morsels out of them as it's moving through the GI. And sometimes, again, if you say, are overhydrated, if something's going on with your body, that tissue within the GI tract also gets super saturated, and then those little muscle contractions that move whatever is moving down the tract, that's not going to move as fast. So rather than having this silly constipation myth perpetuate throughout life, it's basically just going to be either GI, decreased motility, or even stasis if it gets that bad. But yes, I love talking about this with somebody who actually understands osmoregulation and fish internal functions. It's very satisfying for me to be able to talk about this with you.
But it sounds like we're going to need to add another reality TV show comparison to this show, and that's Mythbusters.
Yes, absolutely. All day long. That's what I do.
Speaking of Mythbusters and osmoregulation, putting the two together, you've all heard, especially back in our college days, drink like a fish. And that saying, drink like a fish, it depends on what kind of fish you are.
Yes.
Because of osmoregulation. Remember, a freshwater fish has got water constantly trying to come through its gills. Its water's trying to get inside that fish to equal out the salinity differences between the fish and the freshwater. So freshwater fish are not drinking. The freshwater fish are trying to get rid of water all the time. They pee constantly. Pee like a fish would be a lot more accurate for a freshwater fish. But saltwater fish do drink because saltwater fish have the opposite problem. Saltwater fish are out in an environment that's much more salty, so water wants to leave all the time. And so they drink salt water, and then they actively remove the salt from it and get rid of the salt to try to maintain their internal stasis. So their urine's really concentrated.
Yes, if they, release any pure, urine at all, sometimes, depending on the species, sometimes, just a little pure concentrate that gets squeezed out every once in a while. I mean, a lot of fish species don't even have urinary bladders because they live in an environment where they can just pee whenever they want. So, again, yes, that point is exactly correct where, your freshwater fish just got to get rid of that water constantly, and it's the saltwater guys that need to take in more water and then, again, actively remove that extra salt.
Yeah, and fish don't have urea like you and I, like mammals do. They actually get rid of pure ammonia. For us, ammonia is toxic, and it's not good for us, but they can do it because they're in a water environment and it goes away. But it's interesting we could have a whole show on what animals pee. Talk about uric acid with birds, and we could have a lot of fun with this. I think I just lost half my audience.
I think you gained probably a couple too there, though.
So fish don't get constipated, so when a fish is bloated, it's okay. It's going to pass it eventually. It just hasn't finished digesting right yet, correct?
Yes. Again, depending on the fish and the temperature, in addition, I mean, the warmer it is, the faster things are going to move through. And the colder it is, the longer it's going to take for things to come out the other end. So with that, constipation, again, is the myth of the magical green peas. I don't know if you've heard of this at all. So essentially the treatment for constipation in a fish that really can't be constipated is you feed them green peas, shelled green peas, and nothing else. So the logic behind this, be it not really logic, is the high fiber in the peas will push all of the built up GI tract goo out the other end. Well, the fiber that's in green peas really isn't that different from normal fish food. And since goldfish and koi really don't have acidic stomachs, they can't really break down that fiber anyway. Mostly I think the peas work for two reasons. One, they are a sinking food. So again, going back to our little goldfish buoyancy disorders, being physostomous fish, if they're super hungry and they're at the surface sucking in all this food real quick, it can cause excess air to either go into the GI tract or into the swim bladder. And then you have a little floaty goldfish, you feed them a sinking diet, poof, the air just kind of moves its way out of the fish. And I also, going back to that diet discussion we were having, peas are highly nutritious, full of vitamins and minerals. So a lot of fish, feel better after eating them because it's the first vitamin C and other things that they've had for quite a while. So going back to some of our other fun myths of those magic green peas are not working the way you think they are for treating something that's not really there.
They don't make them poop green, do they?
Mm-hmm.
So that way they can see that those peas move through a lot faster than they thought they would.
Yes. Well, again, depending on the temperature. But yeah, you can definitely, if you feed them a pea and then you watch it come out the other side, about how long that's been in there. It's actually going to be a study that I'm hoping to attempt later this year to see exactly how long it takes for food to move out throughout a standard goldfish GI tract. So using those peas will probably be a good way to determine, when that actually exits the fish.
You can try that at different temperatures, I assume.
Exactly, yes.
Well, Jessie, what are some things that people can do to try to keep their aquaria healthy or their small koi ponds healthy?
So again, it kind of comes down to the things we were already discussing, and that is water quality, diet, and then actually spending time, interacting and watching your fish. Water quality, again, you can't tell anything from looking at it. Make sure that you are checking your nitrogen cycle. So that's your ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, your pH, your KH, or carbonate alkalinity, your GH, total hardness, and then temperature. That's going to tell you a lot about what behaviors you can expect. Because obviously, an outdoor pond that can, depending on where they are located in the world, is going to have a varying temperature range, and those fish are going to have different behaviors based on what the water temperature is doing. And then when it comes to diet, again, making sure it's not too old so they can actually get some good vitamin content in there. And then spending time with your fish, especially if you're the one feeding them. They're going to love you pretty much anytime that you come over with the bag or the canister of food. So it's really important to watch them during that time. I mean, obviously you want to make sure that everyone's up and eating, but it really gives you the opportunity to look at all the fish, make sure there's no weird lumps, bumps, everybody's got their scales, nobody's turning a funky color, and then behavior too. So making sure that, you know, all the fish are actually eating, nobody's isolated in a corner, nobody's swimming odd, everybody can actually get to the surface. And again, it's going to depend on the time of year, especially in the winters we get here, the fish kind of almost go into full stasis and just kind of rest on the bottom, which is perfectly fine. This is normal for these guys, and it's going to vary by the pond. So you might have a 50-degree pond that's all sitting on the bottom. You might have a 50-degree pond that's acting perfectly normal, up and swimming. They want to eat a little bit. And again, that's just going to vary based on your own individual population of fish, which you really only kind of understand after watching them for a while. And for water quality, you mentioned that you need to check all the different parameters, but what about water changes? I know that for aquaria, they recommend 25% to up to 50% water changes on a several week basis. For those small ponds, do you do water changes there, or are those more natural systems? So yes, water changes are going to obviously be part of your normal maintenance cycle. For a lot of those ponds, they have those canister bead filters. So those are recommended to be backwashed at least once a week for a couple minutes. So that's how a lot of people will do their water changes without even realizing it. So for ponds in particular, it's really going to depend on how much water you have and how many fish you have in there. So obviously, the fewer fish you have and the more water, you're not going to have to do water changes as aggressively. But if you have a lot of fish and not a lot of water, you're obviously going to have to do those water changes fairly consistently. Again, if it's 10% weekly, if it's 25% every other week, that's usually the standard that we recommend people at least starting with that. But really, it's important to keep an eye on your pH and your nitrates, because that's going to be the two things that will kind of tell you how often, if you need to change anything about your maintenance routine. Those are the two parameters that are going to give you the most information. You mentioned how many fish you have. Obviously, one of the things that's easy to overlook and to forget about as a pond owner is you don't want to overcrowd the fish. Too many fish is a problem. With too many of any animal in an area is a bad problem, because that's going to increase your disease risk and increase your water quality issues. So don't overcrowd your fish. Don't overfeed your fish, because that food that's not eaten is going to break down and create more problems with water quality. Too much is too much. Yes, and certainly, I mean, all fish start small. There's no way to avoid that. So even if you're starting with this cute little 6-inch koi, it's eventually could get, at least a foot, if not 2 feet long. So you don't want to be in that position where you're like, well, either we dig a bigger hole, which is very expensive, or you have to find new homes for your fish. And those new homes should not be your local lake, as we established in the earlier portion of the show. Yes, absolutely. Well, Jessie, what else have you done as far as writing or outreach type work? So we actually have a children's book series that is designed to get, families with young children interested in keeping fish. It's a 3-part series called Boo and Bubbles. The first book goes through how to set up your fish tank and, bringing your fish home and getting them used to their environment. The second book is Boo and Bubbles, A Visit from the Fish Vet. So that covers maintenance and what you need to do on a regular basis in order to keep your tank healthy, and what my job and role as a veterinarian is, at least when it comes to, little small home aquarium. And then the third book is Boo and Bubbles Meet Goldie. This is bringing a new fish in to join Bubbles in her home tank. So it goes through quarantining and, getting a separate system for a new fish addition, how to introduce them and make sure that they do all right. So you think if I was able to explain quarantine to, 5 to 8-year-olds, I'd be able to explain it to my clients. But it seems like the kids are able to absorb those ideas a little bit better. So yeah, the whole series is available on Amazon if anyone's looking to kind of introduce their kids or a family pet to the equation.
we need to write a fourth book in that series and call it Boo and Bubbles Go on Vacation. And it's all about why not to let them go into the local lake.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
Well, Dr. Jessie, thank you so much for coming out and talking to us today. I think we've learned a lot, and it's a new subject for a lot of my listeners. So if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast and you keep Aquaria, then you know now where to find more information on it, either at the young children's level or all the way up into the koi keepers level. And Dr. Jessie is the owner of Aquatic Veterinary Services. I found her website online. You can find out information from her and contact her. And thanks for joining us today, and thanks for listening to Fish University.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Fish University is hosted by Wes Neal, an employee of Mississippi State University Extension Service and a faculty member in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. This podcast is part of the Natural Resources University network of podcasts. Funding was provided by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you have questions or suggestions, please go to the Extension website at extension.mississippistate.edu. Click on Natural Resources and then select the Fisheries tab in the drop-down menu. Or you can email me at wes.neal@msstate.edu.